So again, my name is Jackie Boland. I'm the Community Outreach Director for AARP Hawaii, and it's really my pleasure to welcome you here today to talk about how to make classic crab cakes with a twist. On behalf of AARP Hawaii and our partners, the Uala Leaf Cafe, Kaunoa Senior Services, and AARP Washington, I'm just thrilled that you're here. The weather is so nice. I'm actually surprised you're not all at the beach. So thank you for taking the time to be here. If you're new to this format, again, you're going to want to go to the upper right-hand corner of your screen and put it in speaker view or speaker side by side. We won't be using the chat today to ask questions of the chef, but you can, of course, ask technical questions and questions of AARP. I am actually in the chat. I'm going to post our new May calendar of events for you so that if you want to see what we're doing, you can download it at the end of the event.
Well, welcome again. AARP's Fast, Healthy, and Ono Cooking. I'm Daniel Swift, and tonight we're going to focus on a classic recipe that you see in a lot of restaurants all across the U.S. and even abroad, utilizing crab meat, and in this case, we're making a crab cake. So I kind of want to just break it down in terms of the components. It's super simple, and if you've ever, for example, made tuna salad, it's basically what we're doing here. There's some primary components that go into it. In this case, obviously, if we're doing a crab cake, we have crab meat. That's our number one ingredient. And then what we call fillers is the next item that we put in there. Tonight, we don't have a lot of those, but you might go to a restaurant, and this is how we can actually save cost, where you might use potatoes, large quantities of breadcrumbs or cubed bread and things like that can help like extend the batch of crab so that you get more crab cakes for your dollar. So that's an important one. In this case, we're just using a little bit of mayo. And then you have to have a binding agent in there. If you followed along through a series of classes that we've done meatballs, we've done pot sticker fillings, and anytime we're doing a meat filling, we end up using, or we start with a raw product. So it's a raw pork or raw ground veal, ground beef, ground turkey, ground chicken. And when that cooks, it binds itself. We'll still usually add an egg or an egg white to help bind it as well. But in this case, our crab's already cooked. So we're not going to get any binding as we heat it. So it's very important that we bind it. In this case, we're going to use eggs or egg whites. Lastly, the seasoning is in terms of the primary ingredients that go into the filling. And then at the bottom, I put what is basically optional is like a coating. So more often than not, you'll see them breaded with a standard breading procedure, which I'll talk about later. But that's not something that you have to do. It can just be put into a patty and either baked in the oven or done in a saute pan. So remember those primary ingredients, and especially when you're dealing with crab, it's something that's a little bit more expensive. This one was from Costco. Most supermarkets will sell it in the seafood department. It's usually in a 1 pound canister or tub or a little can. And I think this was about $20 for 1 pound. So you're paying for pure crab. There's not a lot of other ingredients in there. There might be a little bit of water, maybe a little salt added. It just depends on the brand, but really it's pretty much pure crab meat. So you can see here, I've already eaten a little bit off the top. What you'll find normally when you open up most of these cans is they'll line the top with the really nice big chunks. And then in the bottom or in the middle is more of like the small pieces and parts so that it looks beautiful when you open it up. So if you're making these at home, you want to make sure that you eat a couple of those pieces, because that's your reward for all of the work. And then the rest can, of course, go into the crab cake. So we've got our crab here. And the recipe that I gave was sort of a really basic one. You can get creative and add the spices or the seasonings that you wish, the fresh herbs, the fillers that you wish if you plan to like extend it out and get a little bit more from your pound of crab. The recipe, I put 12 ounces of crab, but I'm going to be using 16 ounces here. So the ingredients that I have listed for that are some onions, just some minced onions. I diced up some red pepper. I've got a lemon that I'm going to do a little bit of lemon zest to put in there. I may even put a drop or two of the lemon juice. I don't have it in the recipe, but we'll just see how it tastes. I know it looks like an orange, but it's a lemon. This is from our Chancellor Artist Eschenberg's yard. Thank you, artist, supplying us again. A little bit of hot sauce. You could use sriracha. I like Tabasco. That works great. But anything to give it just a little bit of heat. If you don't want the heat, you don't have to put that in there. Again, it's sort of up to you. The binding agent we use, in this case, I'm using egg whites. If you're wanting to stay away from the cholesterol, to make it a little bit healthier, just remove the yolks and go with whites. These are extra large eggs, so I have 2 in there, and that should be enough to kind of bind this. We don't want it to be totally cakey like a meatloaf. We want it to be a little bit crumbly when we eat it, so it'll fall apart a touch. And then I have a low-fat mayonnaise as one of the fillers, and also gives some richness to it. You get a lot of richness from the crab, but the sour cream that's low fat, or yogurt that's low fat, or mayo that's low fat, all of which would work pretty well for giving that little bit of richness to the crab cake, as well as some moisture also. So to start off, I'm just heating up a small saute pan. I'm going to cook my onions and my peppers just a little bit, kind of sweat them out. And what I always recommend you try to do is use a nice non-stick pan at home. That can really reduce the amount of fat that you have to use. You can almost go with 0 fat, really. But I'm going to use just a little bit of avocado oil spray. We tend to use this and olive oil spray a lot. So just a little bit in there to give it a tiny amount of fat. And then we can either stir it, or you can saute it, toss it around. But what we want to do here is just sweat it out a little bit. Now, could you add that raw to your crab cake? Absolutely. Depends on how much you love onions and how strong the onion is. Oftentimes, sometimes you'll get an onion that's just really pungent and strong. You definitely would want to saute that. If it's a more mild or a nice sweet Maui onion, then that would work well. You don't even need to saute it. It's up to you. So I'm going to add the ingredients in here. I'll start actually with the crab. And that pops right out. You can see this brand, or hopefully you can. Actually took the time to put the nice pieces of crab on the bottom as well. So you get the nice ones on the bottom, the nice ones on the top, and the inside is more of the broken up pieces. So we want to just break it up a little bit. And there is some moisture in there. We should be fine with that. And a lot of times what I'll recommend, depending on the brand, the higher quality brands tend to be really good about picking out shells, but sometimes you get in there, you want to just get a little feel for whether or not there's any shells in there. And then we can go ahead and add our other ingredients. And here I've got the low-fat mayo. Again, you could use low-fat sour cream or low-fat yogurt, anything that's going to add a little bit of that richness to it. A little bit of the seasoning. I'm just using some uala seasoning. It's got some salt, kanei, some mamaki, some pepper, a little bit of lemon zest. And I brought 2 zesters to show you. One is like the old school zester. This will work, but I would recommend, if you don't have one, to pick up a microplane. This will give you a super fine zest, a little bit better for working in the kitchen. And they're really inexpensive these days. I'm just going to keep an eye on this. Make sure that we're not burning it, sweating it out a little bit. That's actually about done. So only a couple strokes of the lemon gives me enough to get that flavor in there. I've got the egg whites, a little bit of the Tabasco. And again, that's optional. One thing I wrote on the recipe for the seasoning, they make some really nice seafood seasonings. They call them seafood seasonings. Lowry's makes a good seasoned salt as well that works great. Old Bay is a popular one for seafood. That would work really nice in this recipe as well. So I'm just giving this a couple stirs, and then I'm going to look at my breadcrumbs. So here I've got panko. You can use panko. You can use a regular breadcrumb. You can save the heels for your from your bread, loaf bread, grind it up in your food processor, and add that as well. It's up to you to use whatever breadcrumb you want. But I'm going to add this half at a time to see whether or not it absorbs all of it. I don't want it to be too dry. So I'm going to add about half of this amount and then stir it in just partially, because I want to come back after I've started to incorporate the egg white. I can come back and add this. So normally, if I had time, I would set this aside. I'd let it cool a little bit, because you don't want to dump hot product on top of your egg, and it'll cook that egg a little bit. So what we want to do is let it cool. Normally, I'll just stir it in kind of quickly because we only have a limited amount of time for the show. But I give it a little toss. You can see some steam coming off. Get that in, and then break it up, stir it in, and cool it as quickly as possible.
Can you take a few questions, Dan?
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
So Tanya was wondering, since crab is so expensive, can you use imitation crab?
You can absolutely use imitation crab. You could use tuna. I mean, if you've made, like I said, tuna casserole or tuna fish sandwiches, you've made the filling. You could also get fish. So fish cakes are popular, not in Hawaii so much, but you'll see them in other parts of the US, usually on the coastal areas, where they'll just take a local fish and it's poached or cooked slowly and then turned into fish cakes. You don't see that much in Hawaii, but absolutely. Or you could cut this with some fish. Totally up to you.
And then Ingrid's saying she likes to use yogurt or Greek yogurt instead of mayonnaise. Would that work with this recipe?
Absolutely.
And somebody is wanting to know, could you use fresh tofu as a binder?
That's a good question. Tofu won't really bind unless you make it into a tofu naise. Actually, I was going to try to pick some up today for this particular recipe. And I'm okay on the breadcrumbs, so I'm only going to go half. These are dry, 100% panko, as I mentioned, so it'll pull more moisture out than you would get from a fresh ground breadcrumb. So that's kind of why I'm stopping here. But yeah, if you're using tofu, I would recommend you kind of blend it up in a little food processor if you have one, so you make it more of a mayo consistency. That way it'll distribute evenly. I wouldn't just crumble up like firm tofu inside. I mean, it would make a nice filler, but it's not really going to give you that binding that you're looking for with what you get from a mayo or a sour cream or a yogurt.
Thank you. There's more questions, but we can wait
Go
for.
ahead. No, you can go ahead. I'm going to just put on the pan, let it heat up, and then I'm going to shape a couple of the crab cakes.
Okay, great. And I do want to let folks know, I'm sorry I got cut off during the opening, but Dave DeWitt is our volunteer tonight who will be contacting you in the chat if you want a door prize. So please do respond back to him. Janice just wonders, could you use this crab filling for a Chinese dumpling, like a pot sticker?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that would be great. And I love the way you're thinking. That's what we're trying to do. If you follow along with the show, you'll start to see a lot of repetition, at least in terms of the techniques that we're talking about. This is a great filling for, I mean, I don't know that you'd make a crab casserole, but you could. But it's a great filling for pot stickers. It's a great sandwich filling. If it were lobster and we were on the East Coast, lobster rolls are super popular. This would be perfect. You wouldn't probably need the egg whites in there, but everything else would make a great filling for a crab or a lobster sandwich.
And the recipe says canned crab meat, which is super salty in my opinion, but you could use any crab meat, right? But if they want to use crab meat from a can, where do they find it? Is it at the grocery store?
Yeah, the last one I picked up, I got at Times. They had it. Safeway should have it. And then, like I said, the one we have here tonight was from Costco. So when you buy crab, it's only sold in two forms. It's either fully cooked or it's live. You can't buy raw, dead crab. So the different brands will have different levels of sodium. You're exactly right, Jackie. You just want to shop around, and I know it's an expensive experiment to find the brand that you like. This one's actually pretty good, so I didn't need a lot of salt added to it. But yeah, just find the one that you kind of like and works best for you.
I'm sure you can find family members willing to help you with your experiment if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
So someone is asking, can you use brown rice instead of breadcrumbs?
Yeah, cooked brown rice, absolutely. I would dry it a little bit. Any filler like that works great. So, you know, when you're talking about the tofu or you're talking about the brown rice, breadcrumbs, crackers, anything that you can think of that's just going to absorb that excess moisture will work perfectly.
Okay, and then someone else is asking, does red pepper taste different from green, or is it for color?
They do taste different. I don't find that the yellow and orange taste much different than a red, but a green pepper is definitely different. The other three will tend to lean more on the slightly sweeter side, whereas there's a sort of a pungent, not oniony taste, but there's a very distinct taste that you'll get with a green pepper, green bell pepper. My wife doesn't like them at all, but she'll eat a red pepper occasionally.
Great. And Patty's asking for you to repeat the measurement on the panko.
Yeah, on the recipe that I sent out, which had 12 ounces of crab, I used a pound. I called for a cup of panko. So what I did here is I ended up using about half of that, maybe a little bit more than a half of a cup. Okay. For that 12-ounce can. You could, if I dumped it all in, you know, it wouldn't have ruined it, but it might have made it a little bit drier than I wanted.
Okay. And then Cindy is asking, could you use fish cake, Oyo with char siu, etc.? Could this work too?
You could, yeah, absolutely. It just depends on the texture that you're looking for. You're going to obviously get a little different texture. You're going to get a little bit different taste out of it when you're done. The crab is what kind of a lot of people are drawn to in this particular type of appetizer, but it can be anything you want, right? I mean, think about it. If this were ground pork, it would be a sausage patty. It's the same thing. So again, we're just looking at seasoning. We're looking at fillers. We're looking at binding agents, and then the main body of the ingredient or of the meatball or the crab cake in this case, whatever it is you're making. So absolutely.
Okay. Now, most really good nonstick pans tell you never to spray them. And so people are wondering, what kind of nonstick pan are you using?
Never to spray them.
Yeah.
Like with oil?
Yeah, no, it's possible that they're talking about the ones that come in the aerosol cans and not the spritzers like you're using. But like I can vouch for Cephalon and the green pans. They all say don't spray them with an oil spray. With an oil spray.
I did not know that. That's a good question. This is a commercial one. We do it all the time. So I'm not sure what might be taking place. Maybe it's the flash of the oil in a thin layer all at one time, but it's okay for you to cook, I'm guessing, with oil with them.
Yeah, you can put oil in and they just say don't spray them. But what kind of pan are you using then?
This one we picked up at Bar Greens on Sand Island. I don't know the brand, but it's the basic one that's used in industry a lot. It's a aluminum based pan with a Teflon coating. So it's not a fancy copper chef or any of the other ones, all clad. This one's a pretty inexpensive one, and it's what most all of your like saute cooks or omelet bar guys are going to be using if they're doing eggs on a buffet or in a hotel, that sort of thing. These work great for that.
And Sandy wants to know, could you make this in an air fryer?
Of course. Matter of fact, I have the oven on here. You can simply, it wouldn't be done in time for us to probably see it, but you can take, and I'm just patting these out. I'm basically making a puck, you can see. I'm just shaping it, and they hold their shape pretty well. You don't want it more than about 1 inch thick. Usually we'll shoot for like the hockey puck shape. And I could do that and then just pop this in the oven and bake it absolutely. But what you might do for that is hit it with a little bit of coating. So I've got some more panko here. I might hit it with a little panko on top to give it some crunch. And then I could give it a little tiny bit of spray. So what we're doing here is really just almost heating it up. We're giving a little texture to it from the crispness of the outside, but everything's really just needs to be heated up so that those eggs are over 160 and the crab's heated up and we're set there. So same thing here with a little teeny bit of the avocado spray. I can put it in the oven. And that would bake for probably about 15 minutes at 350. You could go higher, but you just need to watch it and be careful not to burn it.
And if somebody's avoiding Teflon and they want to cook it in a regular stainless steel pan, they can do it. They just need to add more oil, yeah?
Yeah, what I would recommend, anytime you're doing something in a regular pan, yeah, you just need to heat the pan first, add a little bit of oil, swirl it around. And then the trick is to drop the product in the oil and while you're slightly shaking the pan. So it doesn't give it enough time to like hit and stick. If it hits and the pan's moving, the product's gonna form sort of an instant kind of crust. And then you can let go and not shake it, and it won't stick. So that's kind of the trick we use in the industry for that.
And someone is asking, can these be frozen?
They can, absolutely.
And do
I
you
actually
freeze
have
them
some.
before you cook them or after you cook them?
Either one. Either one would work great. If you're freezing it before you cook them, do it individually. I would shape them like this, get the puck shape that you're looking for, spread them out on a pan so they're not touching, freeze them solid first, and then you can come back and put them in a Ziploc bag or whatever your Tupperware or however you're storing things at home. That way you don't have to worry about it like losing its shape once you go to use it again at a later time. And then for the, go ahead, Jackie.
Sorry, Mary was just asking, did you use about a 1/4 cup or a 1/2 cup size scoop?
Oh, for this one here?
Yeah.
This is it's probably about a 1/4 cup. And that's why I ended up with a little bit more. The recipe that I have calls for making 8 individual cakes. So they'd be a little bit bigger, more like, so maybe it depends on how much you eat, but probably more towards the entree side of things. But you could make these half the size of the ones that I have here. They don't even have to be this big. Totally up to you.
Go ahead, Dan. Sorry to interrupt.
I was just going to say then on the sauce or the dip, I just got, this can be anything you want. As Jackie and I were talking earlier, she likes peanut sauce with it. Whatever, even your favorite healthy dressing would work. Thousand Island would work. Just depends on what you like. Here I just have some, again, of that low fat mayo, olive oil based mayo, some stone ground mustard, and a little fresh parsley. I'll add a drop or two of the lemon juice to that as well. And then I'm just going to stir that together. I probably don't even need to add pepper or salt because it's already got the seasonings in that mustard. But this can be anything. Just get creative. And I love mustard, so that's kind of just why I chose this particular topping. And these you can see, they're looking good. I turned the heat off. This is the one that went in first. It's a little darker. I can feel how they've softened up, and they've even actually ballooned a little bit from that egg cooking. So that makes them a little bit lighter than they were when they went into the pan. And then we just have to plate it up. I want to show you breading. I think I'll have time. It'll be pretty close. But let me plate this up first and kind of get it out of the way. And because we're working with a crab cake, it gives us a chance to maybe do something a little, maybe, I don't know, more pretty, a little more high end. You don't have to do that. But I just took a cucumber, sliced it thin, and fanned it out. And then put my salad mix in the center. I think on the recipe, I have like a broccoli slaw, but I mean, anything as a base works great for a crab cake. You can eat it just like that, or you can get as creative as you want when it comes to presentation. So normally, if you're going to a restaurant, you're gonna pay a little bit more for an appetizer like this. So it helps to add a little bit nicer presentation to sort of justify the cost. Not absolutely necessary, but a lot of places will do that. And I just
while you're doing that, oops, sorry, I have a couple more questions, but I can wait.
Go right ahead.
Well, Wendy was just asking for the recipe. Could you use fresh mushrooms instead of bell pepper? And I'm wondering about the water content of those mushrooms if you do that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And you can, but that would be sauteed in advance with the onions instead of peppers, right? You want to cook them a little bit. And I wouldn't recommend that you freeze them. As a matter of fact, I used some mushrooms in the last batch that I cooked, and I put them in the freezer. Those were the ones I was going to use tonight to show breading, because it's much easier when they're frozen to do the breading procedure. But the mushrooms would turn a little gray, so it made the crab cake look gray. So you will get the color of the mushroom that comes through. So just be careful with that. Enoki would probably be your best bet if you wanted to go with that, to get the flavor of a mushroom, but not the color. So there's a couple of different ones that you could use instead of just a button mushroom, or I'd stay away from a shiitake or something that's going to add a lot of darkness to it.
Thank you. And then Violet's just asking for clarification. She says the recipe says to bake for 8 to 10 minutes at 375, but you said earlier 15 minutes at 350. Is one better than the other?
No, I just have a toaster oven. That doesn't quite go to the limit that a regular household oven would go to. But all you want to do is just monitor the temperature. So we're just like with the skillet, we're just trying to get a little bit of color on the outside, and we're trying to heat it throughout. So if you go higher temperature, it's going to be a shorter period of time. And you know your oven better than anyone. So, once you get familiar with it, or if you've not used it, and you probably are familiar with it at home, you'll know what temperatures work best. 350 tends to be a standard that works great for most things. And then it's really more of an adjustment of the timing than anything.
That looks so good, Dan. So Sophie is just asking, if she does use imitation crab, how fine should it be chopped?
Yeah, the imitation crab, which I eat a fair amount of, it tends to be in those clusters. It's usually white pollock with crab flavor, and it's packed really firmly. There are a couple brands that will flake a little more easily. So I would say, just break them up into like the bite-sized chunks that you want, maybe like the size of the tip of my thumb. Just think of the texture of the product when you go to eat it, right? You want to make sure that it's you're getting some texture from the lump crab or imitation crab that's in there. You don't want it to be all mushed up like tuna casserole or tuna fish. You want that broken up. You may even break some into larger chunks and some into finer chunks so that it fills a little bit better and filling in terms of the filling, not feel with an E. And then you have the big chunks in there to get the flavor of the crab and that texture as well.
Good advice. So I just want to address in the chat, Richie, if you don't want to put your email out in the chat, you can always email me directly at jboland@aarp.org to give us your address for claiming that prize. We've had a couple people mention fresh dill,
Yes.
Dan, and putting it in the sauce, and then Ingrid is now asking, did you just put fresh dill on top of the crab cake?
I did, yeah, because I have a beautiful dill plant Jackie Malley dropped off. I don't have a green thumb, so it's only half alive. So I wanted to make sure that I use it. She always rescues everything that I take to her and brings it back to life. And then I either use it or I watch it with her. So yeah, dill is ideal for crab and crab cakes. This is oftentimes done with the salmon as well. Salmon cakes, very popular. Jackie, I know you're from Squim, so Washington. Salmon loaf is popular in the Pacific Northwest because they have a lot of salmon. But yeah, dill, I can never get enough dill.
I love it too. So Allison says your plate is so nicely decorated. What is the small orange dot on the rim of the plate?
Yeah, what I did is I used the ingredients that we had already. That's just some diced pepper. Actually, I took it out of the prep that I had earlier, the diced red pepper, and then we had a cucumber in the cooler. And I had the cucumber, the extra here. You know, I had just, like I said, sliced up some red pepper and put in the filling, and then also used it as a garnish. But diced cucumber in this aioli or the sauce that goes on top would also be wonderful. So it's nice to cross-utilize the ingredients that you have. If you're putting cucumber on the plate, it can't hurt to have it in your aioli or in the sauce that's on top. You don't want to get carried away and have it on everything, but it would certainly complement it if it were like that.
I can't believe it, but we actually have run out of questions.
Oh,
Everybody's hungry and they want to go make their crab cakes.
All right.
So
Do a second to show breading.
Yeah, go for it.
This will only take a second, but this is one of the things.
Minutes.
Yeah, this is one of the things that you'll learn if you're going to culinary school. So traditionally, a lot of times the crab cake is fried, to be honest. So they'd be made in advance. And just as the question was earlier, can you freeze them? Yes, you can. They'll be breaded and frozen depending on the thickness. So if they're designed to be fried, when an order comes into the restaurant, they'll usually be a little bit on the thinner side. If they're on the thicker side, then you don't want them frozen before you fry them because they'll look burnt on the outside by the time the center gets warm. So, but most of them are fried. And a lot of the things that we do in the kitchen, because people love fried food, though we don't teach that, are breaded. But you can do a nice standard breading procedure using egg beaters, which are primarily egg whites, or you can just do straight egg whites, a flour, and a breadcrumb. So these are the three components to a standard breading procedure. And we season all three. So I'll always season my flour. I seasoned already the egg beaters, and then I even season the breadcrumbs, unless it's a bread that I made that I know is already really flavorful. And the trick is to just coat your item in the flour first, and then the egg, and then the breading. So I'll try it. Usually I'll chill these. If it was chilled, it would work really, really easily. If it were frozen, it would be even easier. But we want to just a little light bit of flour. What that does, it allows the egg to stick. So we don't want a bunch of it clumped on there. We just a little light coating. We tap it off, and then we can still keep that shape. We then go into the egg beaters or egg whites. You can use whole egg too if you're not worried about your cholesterol. And we just need that little bit of coating. This is sort of the glue that's going to hold on the breadcrumbs. So when you're doing breading, one hand is the wet hand, one is the dry hand. Otherwise, you go from wet to dry with your hand, and your fingers get a big glob of breading on them at the end. So I always take my dry hand, sprinkle some on top, and then I can pick it up and even roll it, especially if it's like a puck. And then we end up with a nice breaded crab cake. Now that does not have to be fried, right? Again, we could bake that. We've sprinkled a little bit on the one in the oven. We could lightly spray this one and bake it, and it would give it almost that fried effect. Air fryer would work good. I know a lot of folks use those. And let me pull out the crab cake here and take a look at it. This is the one that we've baked. Starting to brown. Not quite completely done. It's been pretty close, but we've got some nice color there. You can even see the swelling on it from that moisture expansion and the egg. And this would work great. So that little bit of oil, a little bit of panko works good. And then if you're going to do breading, I would do this in advance, or you could do it in advance of freezing them as well. So it's sort of up to you. If you want to have things in the freezer that are done, ready to go, you can do everything start to finish, have it in the freezer so that you can just take it out, thaw it, bake it, or however you're going to cook it. And then this is the procedure you use for, for chicken, for pork, for tofu, any number of things that are going to get breaded and baked or breaded and fried normally. If you're not concerned with the healthy elements of it, that's the standard breading procedure. So very common, but very important to season all three and go from dry to wet to dry. Last thing I would say about that, Jackie, is a lot of times you'll go to a place and get a shrimp, or you'll get something like a crab cake, and it has a crust about that thick on it from it being breaded more than one time. So you could then come back and rebread this, and it just builds up the layers of breading. So most common, we deal with that with shrimp. So you'll get a shrimp, it's really big, it's beautiful, you bite into it, and there's a little tiny shrimp inside, and it's all breading. So
it's so frustrating when that happens.
Yeah, it's like, oh, more breading than shrimp. And it's the same thing we're talking about with crab cakes in terms of fillers. Is, when you taste a crab cake, it should be primarily crab. You really shouldn't have more than about 75%, or 25% of anything else. It should be at least 75% crab.
I concur wholeheartedly. But Andrea wants to know, why is flour always used first in that process?
Yeah, it's always a wet to dry. So you start, usually anything that you're breading will have some moisture to it. Whether it's chicken, whether it's a piece of tofu, it's damp. So if you go from that damp state right into your egg, it just slips right off. So we want to take care of all the moisture that might exist on the outside of the product first. And then the egg really sticks to that. And then a nice wet coating from the egg allows the crumbs, or whatever your breading final stage item is, sticks really well to that.
Great.
Great question.
Marilyn wants to know, can you save the flour, egg beater, and breadcrumbs for future use, or do you throw it away?
It depends. So once you'll even see that with this egg, or maybe you can see the texture and the color change almost instantly when you add salt. So I added my seasoning, and it went from you can see a little bit that I didn't stir in here on the side. It went from this like light yellow to kind of this deep runnier yellow. So it will lose its effect within about 20 minutes. It's not ruined or anything. You could certainly scramble it up. I might even have some crab flavoring to it or something, but it won't work for a breading because it gets too thin. The salt thins out the protein in the egg. The flour, we generally don't save it just because it's not that expensive and we don't want cross-contamination. The breadcrumbs, if you're doing breading, it can be reused, but what we'll always do is bake it first to kill any bacteria or anything that might be in there. And then we will sift it, and then we can use it again. Great question.
Thank you. So a few folks are asking, can you bake these crab cakes from frozen, or do you have to defrost them first?
To cook them, it depends on how thin and small they are. So as I mentioned, if they're really small, like maybe half this size, you could probably go straight into the oven from the freezer, and that would work. If they're this thickness, you're going to want to thaw them out a little bit. Otherwise, the heat's not going to penetrate the center and have the perfect outside browning because it's too thick. So if you're planning to freeze them, just make them a little bit smaller or a little bit thinner, and it'll work fine. And
you
even
have to worry about them getting soggy when we defrost them?
You shouldn't have to. You might lose a little bit of moisture, but not much. It should be fine because it's bound together with that egg and the breadcrumbs. And those breadcrumbs soak up most of that moisture, and it works pretty well for that.
Thank you. And then Priscilla is asking, can you add a little cornstarch to the flour to make it crispier?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Great question, Priscilla. We could do a whole class on the different, you need these three elements in the standard breading procedure. There's not a lot of substitutions for the egg, although they do exist. But limitless substitutions for breadcrumbs. It can be anything really. And then of course, rice flour, potato starch, wheat flour, any different starch, cornstarch is going to give you a different texture. So if you're doing the cornstarch, you might even skip the latter portion. I don't think it would make it necessarily crispier if you went through this process because it would be buried underneath the egg. But if you just rolled your crab cake in cornstarch seasoned, then fried it or pan fried it, it would work great. If you sprayed it and baked it, that would work as well. So yeah, great point. Just get creative and think, look at what you have and build up that repertoire of tools and skills in the kitchen, and things start to get really, really creative and fun for you.
Thanks, Dan. So the rest of the questions are kind of reiterations of questions we've already had. So just to reiterate, you said they could use fresh fish if they wanted, and you said they could use canned salmon if they wanted, correct?
Fish or salmon, I would not, I'm not a fan of canned salmon. No offense, Jackie, I know you're from the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, I don't eat it.
The challenge I have with canned salmon is it's like bones and spine and everything, or at least the brands that I've had. Now, if you have someone who's canning salmon in Alaska or giving you salmon where it's meat only, no problem. Or if you want to pick through that canned salmon to create just the meat to make the salmon cakes, then that works great. Otherwise, I'd recommend just getting some salmon at the store, cooking it lightly, either in a pan or baking it, and then crumbling it up and adding the mixture to that. So I'm not a huge fan of that, the canned salmon. And then any fresh fish that you would pick up would work great as well.
And then Danny's asking, are there gluten-free substitutions for breading that you're aware of?
Yeah, well, I would just buy your favorite loaf of gluten-free bread and make your own breadcrumbs. That's the way to go. Although last time I went to Safeway, they're not carrying it anymore. So I have to find a new source because we do a lot of gluten-free sandwiches here. There's also some gluten-free flour. Bob's Red Mill is probably your most popular brand. So you can get gluten-free items or use potato starch or something to substitute the dry flour part. But you can find and or make your own crumbs, no problem.
Thank you. And then Lori's just asking, after the breading process, is it better to wait a little bit before you fry?
It depends. I don't think it makes a huge difference. These are actually firm enough where I could have fried them. You wouldn't normally dump it into like a deep, well, you call it a deep fryer, but you wouldn't, a shallow fry is what I would recommend. What you don't want is that to like sink to the bottom and then start to like bob around and break up. That's a challenge. So you would want it to be sort of resting. Like my grandma used to do her chicken, right? A shallow frying, they call it. So it's just submerged maybe halfway and then you turn it and cook the other side. That way it holds its shape a lot easier. But that's a good point. If you dump it or drop it into a deeper pot of fryer oil, it's more likely that it could break up on you. It shouldn't, but it could. It depends on how tightly you bound it.
Okay, we actually have gotten about 6 more questions and we're out of time, but I think we could probably answer them really quickly. However,
no problem.
I just want to let those who have to jump off know that next week we will be doing frittata. Yeah, Dan?
That's right.
Frittata. And that we did just today finish posting all the May cooking programs. Those of you who did sort of the one-stop registration, you're already registered, but I wanted to let you know that May is up and running. So just to quickly get through these last questions, did you say that if the fish was, or if the crab cakes were ½ an inch thick, there's no need to thaw them?
Yeah, I'd say if it's a ½ inch thick or thinner, you don't need to thaw them. It should be fine, especially at like 350. In a skillet, frozen is a little bit trickier. If you're going from freezer immediately to cooking, I'd recommend the baking method.
Okay. And then Dennis is asking, if we try to make a fish cake with local fish, do we poach the fish first or can we use fried fillets?
Oh, awesome.
Um,
Awesome question.
yeah.
Any fish will work. We're fast, healthy, and Ono, so I don't say fried, but any fish that's cooked would work great. And when you're doing a fish cake, the only difference that you get between that and a crab cake is that fish you can purchase raw. So theoretically, you could do this raw with fish, but you're not allowed to purchase crab in a raw state unless it's alive, and we don't see that a lot. So yeah, fish, you're a lot more flexible. So you can use either one.
Okay. And Myra says, which of these starches adds good crispness to fried foods? Flour, cornstarch, or mochiko rice flour? Which is the best?
I would say flour's at the bottom. And the other two are actually, I would say, probably pretty close to the same. And a lot of people actually mix those two together. But like I said earlier, it won't matter for this breading if you're doing this, because it's going to be buried underneath the egg and then the breadcrumbs.
Okay.
But I would say the rice flour is right up there. Yeah.
And then Erica wants to know, could she use corn flour?
Corn flour and cornstarch are the same thing.
Oh, now I did not know that. They did
Well, in
definitely
Europe, they
taste
call it-
different.
Yeah, in Europe, they call it corn flour. It's just basically the starch, the dried ground starch of corn. So corn flour, and unless there's a new product out there that I'm not aware of.
I was thinking cornmeal. That's so that's why. So could you use cornmeal?
Cornmeal would be awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Very popular in the southern United States. This with cornmeal instead of the breadcrumbs, especially with crab or with catfish, beautiful, great texture. Yeah.
Okay, and then for the breading process, what are your thoughts about using buttermilk instead of milk?
Oh, I love buttermilk. We just need now a glass of wine and we can just keep going. To me, the best fried chicken that I've learned to make over the years is with buttermilk. It's usually brine and seasoned chicken. Even if it's breast, it doesn't get dry, but it's flour, buttermilk, flour, and fry. So buttermilk adds a great flavor. It would work well here also. I don't know that you might be able to do it and skip the breadcrumbs. So you'd have to experiment a little bit. I never really do it with a crab cake, but buttermilk works great. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, now that we're all starving and we've gotten through all of our questions, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. And thank you, Chef Dan, for leading us through this. Looks amazing. So everybody, happy cooking, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Aloha.